thanks for joining today. We're obviously keen to find out and catch up on all the wonderful work you do at Futureworlds at the University of Southampton. I think as a starter for six or five, it would be great to just get that kind of quick update on Futureworlds. What's happening? I think you're in year five or six of Futureworlds, or year five or six have you been at Futureworlds? But tell us more.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Really good to join you on the show. Really appreciate it. Yeah, for those who don't know, Futureworlds startup accelerator here on campus at the University of Southampton. So we help the early stage, pre-seed, embryonic startups and aspiring startups here on campus that are trying to get launched, get started. It's a world-leading electronics, computer science, engineering, optoelectronics center. So it's incredibly strong tech base here at the university. So I'm surrounded by brilliantly talented scientists and engineers, and have the privilege of helping them go on that early journey to go from zero to maybe part way towards one in trying to change the world with the ideas and the tech that they've developed.
Great. And I suppose next natural question, Ben, University of Southampton, from my understanding, as I went there and studied history many eons ago, I won't give you the timeline, but obviously the Future Worlds department was not created in the early 90s, but clearly it's going great guns now. If you were to sort of look at success stories from the time you've been in the hot seat as the leader at Futureworlds, any particular founders that you'd like to sort of, I suppose, highlight? They're all winners, I would add, but if there's any that have gone on either recently that you'd like to showcase, and I suppose within that, the university itself, I believe, has a very strong AI, computer science, machine learning department. Is that the kind of the mainstay of a lot of the founders that, or that technology, is it the kind of key area that they're focusing in on?
Sure. Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, it's essentially the which is your favourite child question, isn't it? Which is always a bit awkward, particularly if your children might see the answer. But yeah, I mean,
so you do have a favourite, is what you're saying?
They're all my favourites. Yeah, so yeah, we've had a whole range, as you say, very strong AI research and teaching base here at the university. So we get a number of AI based startups that are coming through. Like one would be Vision, for example, that came through a few years ago, kind of raised Series A, went through Y Combinator a few years ago, back in London, really transforming the approach to brick and mortar retailers, understanding their customer base, a bit like Google Analytics, but for a brick and mortar space. And they've done incredibly well, powering through COVID and all the challenges that COVID brought to in-person retail. But they were able to navigate that through, and a really good example of engineers building a great product and then finding how that can transform a particular industry. And there are a number of ways that they could have taken that. And I guess that for me is the nugget of what we do. Like, for those of us old enough to have watched Silicon Valley and enjoyed all of that series, I'm surrounded by riches, and that's what gets me excited. Is you've got all of these brilliantly talented people who, many of them have done staggering things before they've even thought about a startup. They've just broken the laws of physics. Talking with Anthony earlier on, like A-Quark Technologies came out of the physics and astronomy department here, working on cold atom technology that can be applied into quantum tech. And they have literally broken the laws of physics and created a technology that no one else in the world has been able to do. They've been able to take a magnet out of a magneto-optical trap. So they're just using lasers to suspend an atom that can give you incredibly precise measurements within quantum tech. Well, to be able to help people like him, this is a physicist, came over from Romania a number of years ago to study physics, did his PhD here in the UK, to help him go on the journey from that research into how does that become an incredible startup. That's absolutely fantastic. They're still early stage, currently in a seed fundraise, We'll see where that takes them. That will be a platform to potentially do something incredible. So many of your listeners won't have heard of them today, but I'm very confident that in 10 years' time, that will be a household name that everyone will be saying, wow, that really did transform that whole scene. So that's not an AI play, that's a quantum play. It's very much a hardware play. So although we do have a lot from AI, we've got a couple coming through on the cohort right now. We've also got a strong blend of hardware and deep tech startups that are coming through. And I think that's what's really interesting. And that's certainly what I've seen over the last few years. You say over the last few years of Futureworlds is just those dynamics. And I'm really excited by the changing dynamics around early stage investors looking at deep tech, looking at hardware. Perhaps when I took over Futureworlds, it was very frequent for me to be having conversations with investors that were pretty dismissive of hardware because everyone knows hardware is hard, right? And everyone knows it's going to take a long time to get to market. Everyone knows it's going to cost a lot of money. And the VCs don't necessarily know what the models look like to then scale that. It's not just, enterprise SaaS, and I've got my onboard costs, I've got my cost of customer acquisition, I've got my lifetime value, and I can just run those metrics, pour the money in, and away we go. Much more of this kind of uncertain field. Whereas now, certainly over the last 12 months, more and more I'm having conversations with VCs that are saying, oh yeah, we're opening up a pre-seed fund. We've not really done that early stage investing before, but this is super exciting. Or we're now doing a deep tech fund, and then we're doing a deep tech pre-seed fund. Okay, right. All of these movements that are coming through, and I think what that's reflecting is there's been a cultural shift, I think, in the investor landscape in the UK. There's been changes clearly in the funding dynamic. We've all seen that. But then we've also seen changing dynamics among the research base and these innovators and these builders that are building this tech. That more and more, that's what I see on campus, is that they've done something in the lab. Perhaps in years gone by, they'd have been happy that just sitting in the lab, maybe following an academic path. Whereas now they're saying, like Andre, founder of Aquark Technology, saying, I saw tech that was built 10 years ago sitting gathering dust in my lab. There's no way I'm allowing this to sit in the lab. What do I need to do to get this out? What do I need to do to get this to market? And I think as those two forces come together, that's where the exciting stuff's going to happen.
So, I think as well, there's been quite a lot of proof points as well, right? For quantum, you've seen, quite a few quantum companies go public or raising monster rounds here in the UK as well. And so more people are realizing, actually, for deep tech, we're in a hardware cycle, right? To get to the software stuff, we need the hardware. And there's a market here, right? And I was also looking at Space as well. And, trailblazers like Seraphim Space Fund, right? They kind of make this market enabled as well for early stage investing. So it's kind of this flywheel effect. And I think we had what was it, the halo effect as well that we talked about some of the time, Chris, with Tech Nation.
Yeah. I was just going to ask actually, Anthony, on the and Ben, the whole, if you look at those quantum businesses, often, as is the case at the moment with, when people talk about evaluations of, say, SaaS businesses in the public markets have fallen from 25x to 2 to 4x. How have the quantum businesses fared in relation?
Happy to answer that. I think because a lot of it is, and this is to Ben's point, long-term R&D. You don't really ever want to not be investing in long-term R&D because that really drives a lot of the long-term value for your economy. And so, there's a saying that everything in quantum is early, which I think is also the reality. But there's a big difference in pricing between quantum computers and other quantum technologies like sensors. And actually, sensors, from what I've seen, and there was a good McKinsey report that came out, which I'm going to be doing a LinkedIn series posts about, was the underinvestment in quantum sensors and imaging, where that actually has the nearest term commercialization prospects, and plenty of useful use cases. Right, a lot of people forget that MRI machines are a very popular, well-adopted quantum technology. Right.
I completely agree with what you're saying there, and I think there has been a hype cycle on the computing side on quantum, huge valuations, huge thrown at it. And my reflection is that there's a lot of people that then perhaps over-assumed speed to market and under-assumed how long it would take for some of this hardware to really come to fruition and enable the software play. There are a lot of people who jumped on that bandwagon thinking, okay, it's going to revolutionize this industry now, rather than it's going to revolutionize this industry in the 2030s, maybe. And that's now then recalibrating a lot of people recognizing, okay, we're in a downturn, so we're not going to be getting an exit maybe in the next few years. So if we're playing for the long game, actually we're playing on technology that will be transformational in 2030 and beyond. And quantum is perfectly set around a lot of that. Totally agree with you on the sensing side on quantum, that there's so much promise there to then be delivering use case transformation early, talking a few years rather than maybe 15 years for some of the wildly ambitious computing plans that we see coming through. And I think that's potentially hugely exciting.
I mean, and you know, some of the things I'm excited about, like the versatility of photonics integrated chips, can be used for a variety of things. And you're seeing more fab houses coming out, facilitating that flexibility and delivering those use cases. And on the hardware side, right, with computing, you know, not to turn this into a quantum podcast, but seeing as we're discussing it, you know, I think the hardware that gets a lot of government support besides private market support as well. So that long timeline isn't such a big deal for them, I think. But everything else that is dependent on quantum computing happening sooner rather than later, you're starting to see them, you know, try to find solutions now for creating cash flow. Hybrid computing mixed with quantum computing, quantum inspired, all these other things, right, are helping companies get quantum ready. You know, I think if there's delays on the quantum computing side, you know, that's where maybe some pain might set in for that particular region of quantum companies.
Yeah, and my take on that hybrid thing would be that it reflects the classic challenge you have as a founder in a startup, of the mismatch between investor expectations and market realities. And I think there's been a lot of money that's been put in expecting a whole load of outcomes in a timescale that the market hasn't necessarily been ready for. And now those startups are having to navigate, how do we keep those investors on board who are perhaps losing faith in the outcomes that we had set an expectation of. So it's not going to be easy to get more cash from them, and therefore we're going to have to find a way of getting revenue in the door that's going to cover all of our costs and keep ourselves going. So I think it just reflects those dynamics.
And not to go on a rant, but from my understanding of the market, a lot of the hardware players for quantum computing want to do full stack as well. They don't want to give it away, right? So again, right, where's the reality in these things? So
see how it plays out. What I think is really interesting, and it would be interesting to hear your perspective, Chris and Anthony, around this, is I think this is going to be an indicator. Perhaps there's going to be learning points around quantum that will be relevant for all of the VCs that are wanting to pile into early stage pre-seed deep tech investing, whether it's quantum or sustainability and climate tech and any other of the kind of hard tech environments. What I see is there's a lot of VCs who have got credibility to then be able to raise big funds to then come into that market early, and they're wanting to spread bet. But their expectations, the metrics they would use, the playbooks that they've established for SaaS don't transfer into that same market, and how quickly they're going to be able to navigate that process, how quickly they're going to be able to learn on the job to help those fledgling businesses go through those early pain points. That, I think, is going to be the reality over the next few years. And some, I think, will take to it really well and be really exciting. Others, I suspect, will really struggle. And they'll be sitting in board meetings and they'll discover that the reality is not what they had expected. The forecast that they had, the metrics that they would be managing simply are not living up to expectations. And it may even be that the metrics that they were looking at, they decided completely wrong, and they're having to re-engineer not just the outcomes, but the metrics themselves.
Yeah, I think as well, there are some things that, you know, you don't really realize until you sort of, you know, get 12 to 18 months into it, like you're talking about, you know, around you're transferring tech from academic environments into businesses, commercial environments. And part of that process is, because businesses are also people besides their hardware, right? How do you take academics who are used to a certain way of doing things or a certain environment or different expectations and metrics, right? And how do you help them to gain the operational experience, the commercial experience, and have that hybrid mindset between academic and commercial, right? Those people that are able to really be an expert in both, I think, right, can take full advantage of these opportunities.
Yeah, I agree. And certainly the motivation I have on the Futureworld side and what I see as our day-to-day reality is I would always hang my hat on it's the builders, the tech, the engineer, the scientists, and get that expertise first, optimize for that expertise, help those brilliantly talented individuals who have got a vision for where this tech could be going over the next 10, 15 years. And empower them, help them to navigate from that base to then learn the commercial stuff on the job rather than the other way around. And I would say that is one of the key cultural shifts that I see happening and long to see happen more quickly here in the UK side. I think it's one of the key reasons that as a cohort of startup founders here in Futureworlds, we take our cohort out to San Francisco, out to the Bay Area to just experience the mindset there in Silicon Valley. So in 2 weeks, we take our current cohort out there, and then a few weeks later, we come back and we do our big demo day in London, part of London Tech Week, 14th of June. So any of the people watching this podcast would love to see you there that Wednesday. But it's all about helping them experience that mindset in the Valley, where people are willing to put a big bet on a inexperienced commercially, but brilliant engineer or scientist who's got a vision for how that's going to transform the world. Yeah. And my money is always on those individuals first, help them get started, and then learn the commercial stuff on the job and bring in commercial expertise around them, but always as an enabler of them rather than the takeover, rather than the parachute in from the top. Here's the experienced adult supervision. I'm so
which is often at odds with a lot of the venture capital added value, right? Many of them are not operators or former operators themselves, right? So it's difficult to teach somebody something that you yourself don't know, right? So I think there's a challenge there for people coming into deep tech, right? From that perspective.
Absolutely. And certainly where I see the greatest resonance is where you've got investors that have at least got that operational experience represented within their fund and within the management structure, or ideally where you've got that right at the top, where it's people that have been there and done it and have learned. They've got the scars as well as the rewards through that process, because it does make all the difference.
That's really interesting. Do you see something like, Northern Gritstone and Midlands Mineforge just recently announced? There was always Q-Tech and Q-Tick, but do you see something more formal with the ability to write checks as well as provide support happening for the Southwest region, given the other regions' competition and progress?
Well, it's the South. Southampton's the South, yeah?
I did actually Google it to see if I was screwing that up, so it looks like I screwed that up. But maybe that can all be dragged into it. Southwest.
Move the microscope slightly towards the south. Yeah.
Well, they could call it South by Southwest Innovation Fund.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I certainly see more and more appetite for that. There's certainly a number of the investors around Futureworlds that are keen to see kind of more development around that, and so that's definitely an area that I'm very keen to explore and see where that can lead. I do see some of those regional ones. The reality of some of that is there's a leveling up agenda that is trying to push money outside of London, push it out into the regions, which I think is absolutely fantastic. It's brilliant to see more money going across where there is opportunity. The experience in a place like Southampton, which is actually at a city council level, they've started describing Southampton as a northern city on the south coast of the UK. And one of the challenges that you see is actually the income levels, deprivation levels, lots of the social challenges in Southampton are akin to a number of those northern cities. But we're in leafy Hampshire, surrounded by affluence, seen as part of the greater southeast. in that area and seen as close to London, and so often would be rolled together as, well, you're part of the affluent Southeast, you don't really need any help, which when it comes to regional investment funds, that definitely makes it more difficult to get some of the softer pump priming money that can help to bring in some of the commercial money around it. So there's some different dynamics around there. From my side, I'm less concerned about regional specific funds and more concerned around stage specific, and get just the more money that we can get in at that pre-seed stage to give the greatest opportunity to those visionaries right at the beginning.
The classic conundrum that seems to befit most universities and most of their star founders is I suppose the percentage ownership of that founder that university may take. And it's clearly been a matter of debate, not just for Southampton University, but across the board, even at government level. I think it's
there's an official review underway as well.
Yes, correct. So, obviously it's a sensitive area, Ben. I'd love to hear your thoughts, or candid thoughts, but obviously publicized on a podcast, on kind of what needs to change.
Just going to watch you walk this tightrope now.
Yes, yeah, thanks. Enjoy that. Sit back and enjoy. So I think it would be no surprise, given the kind of thesis that I've explained, that I am strongly in favour of seeing equity concentrated on the founders that are taking the big risks. They're big life risks. These are the people that are going to invest their key years of their lives, their careers, to try to develop something that could change the world for good. And so I'm firmly on the side of, let's see the equity concentrated on those individuals. I am within a university, and within a university that has standard practices where they take a pretty significant equity stake, and I know that that's contentious for a number of founders, and certainly contentious for a number of investors around that. I understand the arguments that universities and tech transfer teams put around why they do some of those things. From my perspective, certainly some of the conversations I have internally within the university is this recognition of the challenging funding landscape for universities in the UK at the moment. And the reality is that we have got, 19 of the top 100 universities in the UK, in the world, here in the UK. We've got an enormous number of world-leading institutions, not just Oxford and Cambridge, not just the Golden Triangle and the London universities. We've got this incredible base, but across the UK, most universities run at a deficit on their teaching. They run at a deficit on their research. They're having to plug economic gaps to keep the lights on, which they do with international students, they do with other services. And sadly, that can motivate institutions to say, well, spin outs, licensing of tech, that could be a source of unencumbered income, that can be a lifeboat for us. So yeah, we've got to take everything we can get, because that helps to underpin everything else. And I think that is it's dysfunctional behavior. It's certainly suboptimal, but I can understand why university administrators who are not startup founders, they're not VC investors, would see that as an opportunity. And here in Southampton, we've had various spin-outs that have had hugely successful exits. One just recently sold to Microsoft, and that suddenly gives a windfall to the university that can make a huge difference. And then that can create this fear of missing out, where the university, well, I don't want to. If I give low equity to this one, well, then maybe if they become a unicorn, I'll be the person who everyone says, well, we could have had 20 million that then made us solvent. So I understand that pressure, and I think at a government level and a policy level, we need to find ways of helping to align those incentives to create the funding base so that universities can focus on their prime mission of creating knowledge that can change the world for good and for the better, and enabling that to get out and have the impact that it can have. And in the startup and spin out area, that is about empowering those founders to go on those ambitious journeys. It's recognizing that many of them, they're going to be high risk. They're not going to bring an economic return to the shareholders anytime soon, and maybe ever. And so what we should be focusing on is, how do we set them up for success and use power law thinking as well, and recognize that you're going to enable hundreds to try to flourish. Only a few of those will. So play for those big wins, and stack in favor of those rewards. And I think there's what we can do at a government level to support and encourage that.
I suppose just thinking out loud here, is there a place for some kind of central government backed vehicle that is a highly capitalized vehicle that could deploy investment in a type of a VC type manner to university creations across the UK? So it's kind of like a super fund that is there to effectively, take the very best talent from all of the different universities in a given year, and be it, you could call it, where a fund refreshes greenfield,
Evergreen.
is it? Evergreen.
Yeah.
I think you have some of that
and maybe within that, obviously the key thing here is, building HMRC and have give it kind of EIS or VCT type qualities. But we're talking, I mean, let's not mess around here. We're talking billions rather than millions each.
I think some of the work at British Business Bank through the Enterprise Capital Fund, right, that gets deployed. They're a backer of both of Seraphin Space funds. And then you also have British Patient Capital. They're one of the backers of the Midlands Mine Forge as well, right, to the leveling up agenda. So I think there is a lot of good work from the British Business Bank to enable some of those things.
Small. It's relatively small in the size of the opportunity. If you look at what Macron is doing in France, he's effectively done this with the BPI fund, which I think is a 20 billion euro fund. Yeah. And it's the government's way of backing the creativity and innovation that's happening in France at the moment. We really need that.
There is opportunity, and I think absolutely the government needs to step up and not put headlines together of a few hundred million here and a few hundred million there, and saying there we're going to be a science and technology superpower, but here's a tiny little puddle. So that, I think that has to be really ambitious. I think one of the risks of doing a very large, highly centralized fund is that it will inevitably start becoming driven by certain politics, certain interests. It's very difficult to get down to the grassroots level, and really getting behind those builders and founders at the earlier stages. I would always argue for a much more deep.
Maybe they have champions like you in each of the universities as part of the actual fund committee, or
potentially, and certainly I'm encouraged. When you talk to people like Ilan Gur at ARIA and people in Innovate UK, as well as you say, British Business Bank, British Patient Capital, there's intent there, and there is funding that is coming through. I would certainly
like action though.
I think there's two things that are worth mentioning here, right? Is A, the scale up capital. That is a huge missing piece, not just here, but in Europe. And that's one of the bigger issues, I think, especially if you're trying to build deep tech early stages. They're all going to get to a certain level, and then what, right? Best ones will get bought by Microsoft, right? Everything else will go. And the other bit of it, the other bit of it is, I was at a British Business Bank event yesterday for the Enterprise Capital Fund. And this is public information, so I'm not sharing anything I shouldn't be. But because of the rigorous due diligence that the bank takes with setting up these VC funds, if they give, the offer letter to some of these fund managers, it unlocks so much more private capital, because they can at most only be 60%. That then allows more LPs to become familiar with the asset class, to get comfortable with these fund managers. And so I don't think you could just, besides the points that Ben brought up about a totally publicly owned state wealth or sovereign wealth fund, and those issues, I think it's better to bring in private markets. So some of the things on Solvency II, and enabling reform and pension funds to allow them to be more engaged in the LP market. I think those are better delivery methods rather than, the government backing winners, or, a change in power and then a change in policy and all those issues that come with it. I think there are much better delivery methods available.
Yeah, I would also argue like a nice snapshot would be like in years gone by with Futureworlds, we'd go to CES out in Las Vegas beginning of each year, and you'd be there and there would be a relatively modest UK pavilion. And I know the government came under some flack over various years around just dipping their toe in the water. But we would be there with some incredible startups that were coming through. In Eureka Park, the early stage section of CES, you had just a sea of French stands, like row upon row, where France had poured investment behind taking this space. But actually, as you went down those aisles, there were some that were impressive, but you had lots and lots of dross because there was government funding being thrown at this. So this person's developed a slightly different needle for a record player, and oh great, okay, because they've come from this area of France, then we've only got 3 that have applied, so we're going to take them out to CES, and you're looking at it thinking this is just kind of
maybe it's my American values, but I much prefer for private markets to work with public to, public is there to stimulate and enable and foster, but then private markets need to come in and be as efficient as they possibly can in a capital inefficient model, which is venture capital and startups.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I think that there's a place for the government money to help to pump prime, to help to enable that interface. But there's got to be the risk taking in there. There's got to be
like Innovate UK, fantastic program. And now they're doing work. I saw that they're now partnering with Switzerland to fund innovate projects and this sort of stuff as well. And I think there's more things like that can be done for the early stage to then allow other more traditional LPs to engage in this particular asset class.
The only caveat,
an overriding arch to all of this argument is numbers, as in need bigger investment, and universities need to take less big stakes.
I don't know if I particularly buy that argument, because I think, and there was a panel that I saw on deep tech investments at Emergence. I think we were both there, right? And one of the panelists made a very good point that particular bit of the landscape is not that dissimilar from other markets where there's a bigger throughput, right? So if you're looking from start, which is where we're talking about now, to finish, either acquisition or IPO, there's still a huge IPO reform that's happening and going underway, because the IPO market for, the FTSE is abysmal at the moment. And so they're looking at it, right? So if you have better outcomes, you will get more input, right? And participation and all these sorts of things as well. So I think there's plenty of work to be done in laying the groundwork to actually then build something on top of it, right?
Yeah, I think the only caveat I'd make to the bringing private in early, which I absolutely agree with in terms of bringing that commercial bite so that it's not just soft funding and can just go on grant after grant, is at the earlier stages on this hard tech, long lead cycle where it's going to be difficult, maybe early stage, to find the use case. There is a point at which bringing private investment in too early skews it in the wrong direction. And I think particularly while LPs are having to learn on the job around what the life cycle of a deep tech investment is going to look like and how long it's going to take to get an exit, if you bring the wrong LP in too early, what we will see is brilliant engineers push to get suboptimal results because they can get an outcome in 3 to 5 years that might give a modest exit to a tech firm somewhere, rather than actually, if we can be patient, the outcome could be stellar, but we're going to have to accept the risk for longer. And
which is one of the oddities of private markets, right? Especially venture capital. Public markets, they always say you can't time the market. Private markets, venture capital, timing is everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're obviously driven by an exit cycle that they need to hit, and they need to raise their next fund. And, we all understand why that happens, but getting that alignment is challenging at the early stage.
Okay, I think we will all eagerly await the publication of this paper that is it happening in June or July? Has there been a date given for the?
So, I mean, the government's running consultation. I was on a call just this week where I was running the panel, running the review from the government, and so they're certainly looking as widely as they can.
This year, then potentially, I suppose, hopefully.
That's what they're working towards.
Yeah, I want to say a big thank you to Mr. Clark. Wisdom of the highest level, as you said, just to repeat, and I will be sending an invite to your event out to all of our ecosystem on. It's the 14th of June, I believe.
Yeah, Wednesday, 14th of June at the BFI on South Bank, and that will be 5 o'clock in the evening, so end of the working day, part of London Tech Week.
Brilliant, and good luck in the States. I'm very envious of your trip.
Worth saying as well, actually. So we've got an open, pitch and mixer event. So any of your audience that are out in San Francisco, so that will be Thursday, the 18th of May. So a couple of weeks' time. If people want to meet up with us in the city, we're going to be at 25 Lusk. So it'd be great to see any.
There you go.
So that means that Anthony
in San Francisco.
Sorry, Anthony, you might.
I was saying we can see your selfie in San Francisco in May.
Yeah. And the one other thing what that means is Anthony's going to have to do some speedy editing because we need to get this published before that event.
Yeah.
So there you go, Anthony. You taught the most. You set yourself up.
Publishing it at all, obviously,
All right, look, have a great weekend, everyone.
Thanks. Fantastic. Great to see you both.
See you later.